heroic life? How can a philosopher live a heroic life?
She was always swimming against the tide. She was an independent thinker, but she always sought discussion with others, and she did not shy away from confrontation.
To think and to be fully alive are the same, and this implies that thinking must always begin afresh. It is an activity that accompanies living.
Hannah Arendt's philosophy was grounded in practice. She examined the reality of her time, attempting to understand the reasons behind it.
If Hannah Arendt had not existed, it would most certainly be necessary to invent her. Her life is a parable, not just of our age, but of several centuries of European thought and experience.
Hannah Arendt is known today as a political philosopher, particularly for her concept of the banality of evil.
I don't understand that. When something happens to someone, it's never banal for the victim.
That's not what she means. It's not the act or the consequences that are banal, but the perpetrator. The fact that evil is not banal for the victims makes it all more frightening when the perpetrators are mediocre. The example she gives is the Holocaust, and specifically one of its perpetrators, Adolf Eichmann. In 1957, he was put on trial in Israel, and Hannah Arendt traveled there specifically to report on it. She expected to see a monster, but saw only an average person who did not thought about his actions.
She dared to address the most challenging political issues.
That wasn't always the case. She studied philosophy, but her initial interests lay in pure theory and romanticism.
It was not at all common for a woman to study in her day, the 1920s.
Hannah Arendt owed a lot to her mother. She encouraged her intellectually. Hannah was interested in philosophy from a young age. By the age of 14, she was reading Kant and later Kierkegaard and Jaspers.
Why did I read Kant? For me, it was a question of either studying philosophy or going into the water, so to speak.
For Hannah Arendt, philosophy was existential, a matter of life and death. She didn't want to educate herself so much as she wanted to understand. Hannah was also a rebel who always stood up for justice. Her mother encouraged her in this too. For her mother, it was clear that one must protest against injustice. When Hannah was insulted by a teacher at the age of 18, she incited her classmates to simply stay away from his classes. As a result, she was expelled from school and had to take a high school diploma as an external student.
Hannah Arendt was also Jewish.
She had to put up with discrimination even as a child.
I come from an old Königsberg family. Nevertheless, the word Jew was never used in our home when I was young. I first encountered it in anti-Semitic remarks made by children on the street, not worth repeating. That's when I was enlightened, so to speak.
After graduating from high school, she studied at the University of Marburg, philosophy as her major, as well as Greek and, although she came from a Jewish family, Protestant theology. She was interested in Protestantism because of Kierkegaard.
Did she mainly study existential philosophy?
No, she studied in Marburg under Heidegger, the most important figure in phenomenology. She even had an affair with Heidegger despite him being married. That's why she went to Freiburg to study under Husserl, Heidegger's teacher. She then went to Heidelberg to study under Jaspers, whose philosophy was inspired by Kant. Her studies fulfilled her, and the problems of her existence receded into the background for the time being. Instead, she wrote about the concept of love in Augustine's work. Fascinated by romanticism, she wanted to write her postdoctoral thesis on the subject. Ultimately, she decided to focus on the romantic writer Wilhelm von Hahn.
Hannah Arendt had probably arrived in the world she had always wanted to be in.
But in 1933, she was awakened from her romantic worldview. In fact, she had already recognized the danger of the Nazis seizing power in 1929. Hannah Arendt was always an astute observer, and by 1933, the Nazis had seized power. Hitler had become chancellor.
How did she react to this?
Not all of her contemporaries were aware of the dangers. The conservative parties that brought Hitler to power thought they could control him. Arendt knew from the outset that this was an illusion. She prepared a documentation on National Socialism for the Zionist Congress of 1933. As a result, she was arrested by the German police. But she was lucky. The police officer sympathized with her and released her. It was clear for Hannah Arendt that she could not stay in Germany. She fled to Paris.
This was not an easy decision. She wanted to pursue a career in academia.
She was stateless for 18 years. However, her involvement with the Zionist Congress enabled her to find work in Paris. She became Germaine de Rothschild's secretary. Recognizing the danger posed by the Nazis, she started working for the Youth Aliyah. This organization helped Jewish immigrant children enter Israel. She met Heinrich Blücher, a communist who had fled from the Nazis. She turned into a political philosopher. Under the circumstances, her statelessness, her work at the Aliyah, and her discussions with Blücher.
German Romanticism came to an end with the Nazis.
Then Germany invaded Poland, prompting France to enter the war. As a German, she was imprisoned by the French police in a sport palace in Paris. She had to stay there for several weeks until she was sent to the Gurs concentration camp near the Pyrenees. It was a woman-only camp. During the chaos of the French collapse and the establishment of Vichy France, she managed to obtain her release papers.
Then she was able to leave France.
It wasn't that simple. Although she had been released from the concentration camp, she still didn't have a passport to leave the country. Moreover, she didn't have a visa to enter another country. As a Jew, she was not welcome in Vichy France either. However, the courageous socialist mayor of Montauban took in refugees. Many German intellectuals gathered there. Hannah Arendt reunited with Heinrich Blücher. The refugees in Montauban all wanted to leave. The easiest route was via Spain and then on to America.
America, the land of the free.
But America had no desire to take in refugees. It was extremely difficult to obtain a visa. Anti-Semitism was also very strong in the US at that time. And there was no sympathy for communists. For many refugees from Montauban, the situation was hopeless. Her friend, the literary critic and philosopher Walter Benjamin, took his own life.
Unfortunate circumstances.
Hannah Arendt was luckier, because she had previously helped others in need through the Youth Aliyah. Thanks to her connections with the Zionist organization, she and Blücher were able to obtain emergency visas to enter the United States. In January 1941, they traveled via Spain to Lisbon. They then arrived in New York by ship.
They were saved.
They had saved their lives. However, they had no work or money. Hannah Arendt was still unknown at that time. She had not yet written any of the works that would later make her famous. She was an intellectual who researched the love of Augustine and German Romanticism.
In 1940s New York, that was probably of little interest.
She worked for an American family to learn English. She was already 35 years old when she started learning English, and she never lost her strong German accent. Even later, when she started publishing in English, she continued to write in German. She soon started working for a German Jewish newspaper, Der Aufbau. There she primarily dealt with the Palestinian question. She advocated establishing a Jewish army so that the Jews in Palestine could defend themselves. She believed that a two-state solution was the only realistic option. She also believed that the creation of a Jewish state could not result in the Palestinians becoming stateless. She criticized radical Zionists and was subsequently dismissed from the newspaper.
As her mother had taught her, she always stood up for her convictions.
The turning point in her life came in 1951. She obtained American citizenship. This secured her residency in the USA. She was grateful to be living in a country where she could become a citizen without having to assimilate.
Hannah Arendt always wanted to stay true to herself.
A year later, she published her first major work, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Now she was recognized.
But even then, the recognition was shadowed by controversy. In her book, she equated communism with fascism. At the time, everyone else saw them as opposites. Many intellectuals who criticized fascism were sympathetic to communism. Hannah Arendt was initially quite alone with her thesis. However, it was also one of the first theoretical works on fascism ever written. The war had ended only a few years earlier, and many people had not yet recovered from the learning about the horrific Nazi crimes. Arendt was one of the first to provide answers in her book. Consequently, she was offered visiting professorships at renowned universities such as Columbia in New York, Berkeley, Cornell, Chicago, and Princeton.
Which university did she get permanent tenure at?
None. She wasn't interested in that. She believed that teaching would distract her from her work. That's why she only gave lectures on topics she was currently researching. She focused entirely on her philosophy.
I cannot write and teach at the same time. These are two activities that are fundamentally opposed to each other, and I do not have the talent to combine them.
It was not until she was 61 that she became a professor at the School of Social Research in New York. Perhaps that was her way of retiring.
But she never stopped working.
Hannah Arendt was not only a political philosopher who placed action at the center of her thinking, she also lived according to her philosophical convictions, repeatedly taking a stand on current political issues.
Oh yes, she wrote about the Eichmann trial. Eichmann was one of those responsible for the Shoah. He organized the transport of millions of Jews to concentration camps. Almost half of them died en route. He is the epitome of inhumanity.
Yes, Hannah Arendt was first commissioned by the New Yorker magazine to report on the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. But the articles soon turned into a book. When she arrived in Jerusalem, she was surprised by Eichmann's personality. She had expected a monster, but saw an ordinary person instead.
What was the reaction to the articles and the book?
They sparked a fierce controversy that lasted almost 3 years. Many found it unacceptable that she described Eichmann as a banal person. He did not commit these crimes because he had an evil personality. Instead, he simply followed orders without thinking about them or their consequences. Arendt's aim was not to minimize his guilt, but rather to gain a better understanding of his crimes. She had no doubts about his guilt. Some Jews were also appalled by her advocacy of an international court. She demanded that Eichmann be judged by an international court, not by Jews.
This is the only way to ensure international jurisdiction. Otherwise, it would simply be an act of revenge. The legality of the verdict could then be called into question.
She also wrote about the Jews' councils that collaborated with the Nazis. In her opinion, open resistance was impossible, given the brutality of the Nazis, but refusing to collaborate would have been a possible form of resistance. Some interpreted this as meaning that she was suggesting that Jews were complicit, but this was not her intention. As is often the case with such controversies, little reference was made to her text. The debate was very emotional.
She didn't have it easy.
She always sought discussions and wanted to exchange arguments. To her, plurality and perspective were fundamental human qualities. For Arendt, politics is something in which everyone must participate. Politics consists not only of ideas and convictions, but above all of actions. Ultimately, power in politics is the power to act, and to act together. As human beings, we always have a responsibility. This is a tough one. Her books are an ongoing discussion. You find a summary of her theory in Human Condition, but a good start are her interviews. They provide a clear insight to her thought process. Then you can delve into a text on the subject you are interested in.
I'll do that. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, and see you next time.